They laughed before Eli even finished the first wall. High in the frozen mountains, where the wind howled like it had teeth, Eli worked alone. He was a boy no older than 17, but strong and careful, moving with the patience of someone who had nothing to lose. The villagers had climbed the steep trail to see what he was doing, curiosity turning into amusement almost instantly. What he was building did not look like any cabin they had ever known. It was strange, low, half buried into the mountainside, with walls that leaned at odd angles and a roof layered in a way no one understood. "This isn't a home," one villager sneered, shaking his head. "It's a cave pretending to be a cabin." Another laughed, kicking at a loose rock. "It will collapse as soon as the first heavy snow falls. You'll be crushed before winter even begins." Eli didn't answer. He never answered. He kept working, measuring beams, fitting logs, and cutting wood with a precision that made the villagers pause for a second, even if they didn't show it. His hands were rough, but careful, and he moved with a quiet determination that no one could shake. He had a plan, though no one could see it yet. While the villagers built tall, simple cabins, wide enough to fit a small fire and a few beds, Eli was thinking differently. He dug part of his cabin into the mountain, not for hiding, but for protection. He layered his roof with extra beams, then covered them with soil and pine needles. From above, it looked strange, almost suspicious, like he was trying to hide something. He added narrow doors, low ceilings, and double walls, sealing every crack meticulously. "What is he even doing in there?" a villager whispered to another, clearly unsettled. "Why go through all this trouble for a stupid cave?" But Eli didn't stop. At night, when the village fires flickered and families huddled inside their warm cabins, he measured shadows, checked the wind, and listened to the mountain. He could feel the cold coming, long before the snow actually fell. Every beam he placed, every extra layer he added, was to prepare for a winter no one else could imagine. Some villagers said he was scared, hiding underground, afraid of life. Others said he was foolish, wasting his energy on something that would fail. But Eli knew the mountain better than anyone else in the valley. He had walked alone in its peaks for years, watching storms form, feeling snow in the air before it hit the ground. The mountain was alive to him. Its whispers, its small shifts, and sudden cold gusts were instructions. And he followed them. He built a strange extra space beneath the floor of his cabin. It was hidden, by the second night of heavy snow, the village murmured in fear. "He's mad," one man muttered. "Or lucky. I don't know which is worse." Others went outside to check, only to see Eli moving inside the cabin, calm, methodical, almost like he had a secret the rest of them couldn't even imagine. The first blizzard hit with full force. Snow piled high, wind shredded rooftops, and the villagers huddled, praying their homes would survive. The weak cabins groaned under the weight of ice and snow. Windows cracked. Roofs threatened to collapse. Panic filled the village. Eli stayed inside, barely noticing the storm. He lit a small fire in the cabin's center and moved down to the hidden space beneath the floor. There, the air was still. Warmth stayed trapped naturally, perfectly, without extra effort. The walls, reinforced with earthen beams, held steady. He could hear the mountain above and around him, feeling its vibrations, sensing the snow settling. Outside, people feared for their lives. Inside, Eli stayed calm, patient, prepared. Some villagers dared to peek at his cabin during the storm. All they could see was snow piled high, almost completely burying it. They thought it was gone. They whispered about Eli being trapped, about the foolishness of living alone in the mountains. But Eli wasn't trapped. His cabin was more alive, more secure than anything the village had built. Every detail, the narrow doors, the double walls, the extra roofs, the hidden floor space, was a careful decision. Every detail had been tested in his mind, imagined through storms that hadn't even come yet. The villagers couldn't understand his choices. To them, the cabin looked strange, even suspicious. Why build like this? Why work so slowly, so meticulously, while snow already started falling? Why hide part of the structure underground? They didn't know what he knew. The mountain was dangerous, unpredictable, and ruthless. Only careful planning, patience, and respect for its power could survive it. As the night deepened, the wind shrieked across the mountains. Snow drifted like waves, burying paths and fences. Fires struggled. Doors rattled. Windows threatened to shatter. And the villagers could only hope their cabins would hold. Inside the half-buried wooden cabin, Eli moved quietly, checking his roof, adjusting his beams, and listening. He knew what the storm wanted to test. He knew how it would strike. He had built not just for shelter, but for survival. The mountain itself would challenge everyone in the valley, but only those who listened, planned, and prepared would make it through. By the time the storm had fully arrived, the villagers were panicked. Roofs creaked. Smoke barely rose. Some cabins began to fail under snow weight. They looked toward Eli's cabin. Thin smoke still climbed steadily from its roof. Warmth was inside, steady, alive. They didn't understand. But Eli did. And the mountain was only just beginning its test. The blizzard hit without warning, swallowing the mountains in white chaos. Snow tore across the peaks in sheets, driven by wind sharp enough to cut through clothes. Trees bent under the weight, groaning as if in pain. Villagers scrambled to protect their cabins, stacking wood, shoveling snow, and praying their fragile roofs would survive. Every gust of wind shook their homes, rattled windows, and made chimneys cough smoke that refused to rise. Panic spread faster than frostbite. Eli didn't panic. He stayed in his half-buried cabin cave, calm and deliberate. The wind screamed outside, but the layered roof, the packed earth, and the double walls blocked almost everything. He moved silently, checking small gaps, adjusting a beam here, sealing a crack there. The cabin felt alive in the storm, holding warmth steady, while the snow piled higher with every passing hour. The villagers watched helplessly. Their own cabins shivered and groaned, some already leaking cold air, some cracking under ice and snow. "How is he still standing?" one asked, eyes wide with disbelief. Another shook his head. "It doesn't make sense. That cave shouldn't survive." But Eli didn't care about their disbelief. He had predicted the storm. He had planned for every gust, every drift, every pile of snow. His secret space beneath the floor was where he moved now. The air was still there, warm, trapped perfectly by the double walls. The hidden lower floor felt like a pocket of summer in the heart of winter. He sat down, lighting a small fire, not for heat, but for light, and watched the storm through a small opening he had built high above, out of reach of the snow. Outside, the wind became a living thing. It tore through the village, bending trees until they cracked. Snow hammered against cabins like waves. Smoke from chimneys struggled to rise, twisted by the wind. Roofs shook violently. One of the older village homes groaned and gave way under the weight of snow. The roof collapsed, sending ice and debris crashing down. Inside, people screamed and scrambled to save what they could. Another cabin cracked from top to bottom, cold wind pouring through, leaving its occupants shivering and terrified. Through it all, Eli remained calm. He knew the mountain would test them all. Some called it luck, he called it preparation. While the village trusted tradition, he trusted thought, observation, and patience. Every layer of his roof, every beam, every hidden space had a reason. Every step he had taken in construction was a small, careful defiance of the mountain's fury. The blizzard continued for 3 days without pause. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Snow drifted into walls and windows, piling against doors, burying fences, and reshaping paths. The villagers feared the worst. They could barely see each other through the white haze. Their cabins groaned under snow's weight, and fires barely stayed alive. Many huddled together in corners, unsure if they would survive until dawn. Eli, meanwhile, moved with quiet efficiency. He tested airflow between walls to make sure warmth stayed trapped. He added small barriers to stop snow from slipping through cracks. He walked through his hidden lower space, inspecting each corner, making sure the fire's heat reached the most important areas. Every decision he had made weeks before, the double walls, the narrow doors, the low ceilings, the extra roof layers, suddenly proved vital. The cabin wasn't just standing, it was thriving, almost untouched by the storm's fury. At one point, he heard a deep rumble through the ground. The mountain shifted, moving snow and ice in a distant avalanche. His heart didn't race. He had prepared for this. His cabin was on a slight ledge, shielded by rocks and trees. The avalanche would hit the slope above him, not his cabin. Outside, the villagers didn't know. They could only watch from their shaky rooftops, fearing the mountain's unpredictable wrath. By the second night, the village was desperate. Roofs had collapsed or cracked. Fires had gone out. Windows were iced over. Snow blocked doors. The cold seeped into everything. Some villagers ventured out, desperate to check on Eli, hoping his strange cabin could teach them something. They saw smoke rising steadily from his roof, thin and calm, and their fear mixed with disbelief. How could he stay alive, warm, and untouched when their cabins were failing all around them? Eli, in the hidden lower floor, watched the snow pile higher. He checked a small trapdoor he had built in case the main entrance was blocked. The wind outside was so fierce it could lift a person if they stepped out. The snowstorm roared like a beast, but inside, it was silent except for the small crackle of fire. His cabin trapped warmth like a living thing, holding it steady no matter how hard the mountain tried to fight. The villagers' panic grew. They shouted at each other, blaming the mountain, blaming anything except their own lack of preparation. Some tried to dig through the snow to reach Eli, but the storm made it impossible. Visibility was near zero, and drifts towered like walls. They thought he must be trapped, or worse. But Eli wasn't trapped. He had chosen every material, every beam, every layer with care. He had planned the hidden floor not as a secret, but as a refuge, and the double walls had worked better than he even expected. He could feel the cold pressing from outside, but inside it was steady warmth. The fire was small, the cabin silent, the snow outside piling higher and higher. Then came the sound he had anticipated, a low, distant roar. Snow and ice shifted on the mountain above, moving faster than gravity should allow. The villagers froze in terror, knowing what was coming. An avalanche was imminent. They shouted, ran, and prayed. Their cabins groaned under the weight of snow. Some roofs cracked. Others collapsed entirely. Panic filled the air more densely than the snow itself. Eli stayed calm. He didn't move to escape. He didn't panic. The avalanche hit the slope above, snow crashing down in a controlled path that his cabin's location had avoided. The mountain struck the hillside, sending a wave of snow past his main entrance. From outside, it looked as if his cabin had been swallowed entirely. Smoke still rose faintly, but only barely visible above the snow's cover. To the villagers, it was a miracle or madness. They couldn't see him, couldn't understand what had saved him, and could only imagine the worst. Some thought he might be trapped under the snow. Others feared the worst for his life. But Eli wasn't trapped. He had prepared for exactly this. The hidden lower floor, the layers of the roof, the careful placement of walls, all of it worked. He sat quietly, feeling the mountain settle, listening to the snow fall, almost like applause for careful planning. By dawn, the storm had slowed. Visibility returned just enough for the villagers to see the damage. Homes were broken, smoke struggled to rise, roofs had fallen. They began to worry about Eli, climbing toward his slope with fear in their hearts. What they saw stopped them in their tracks. The snow completely buried the entrance of his cabin. No roof, no door, just a mound of white. They whispered among themselves, unsure of what to think. Had he survived? Was he trapped? Or worse? Their fear mixed with awe as the thin trail of smoke rose faintly above the mound. Eli was alive. Warm. Calm. The cabin was intact inside, untouched by the fury above. Every decision he had made, every beam, every layer, every hidden corner had saved him. The villagers didn't understand it yet. But Eli did. And the mountain wasn't done testing them. The storm finally broke. The mountains were quiet again, the wind reduced to a whisper, and the snow glittered under the weak winter sun. The village emerged from the chaos like survivors from a battlefield, shaken, exhausted, and terrified. Roofs had collapsed. Walls were cracked. Fires had gone out. The air was sharp, heavy, and full of fear. People huddled together, unsure of where to start, afraid to leave their damaged homes. Every step outside was a struggle through deep snow, and every glance at the slope above reminded them of the avalanche that had nearly destroyed everything. Some villagers began the dangerous climb toward Eli's cabin. The snow had buried it completely. From a distance, it looked like nothing survived. The entire structure was hidden under a mound of ice and debris. They whispered his name, voices small and trembling. "Eli, are you alive?" For a moment, there was only silence. Then, slowly, a small part of the snow shifted. A hidden exit that no one had noticed opened near the rocky side of the mountain. Eli stepped out calmly, carrying his tools and a small bundle of firewood. He was dry, unshaken, and surprisingly warm. His clothes had snow, but none had soaked through. His eyes were steady, sharp, and unafraid. The villagers froze. They had expected desperation. They had expected panic. They had not expected this. Eli moved toward them, each step deliberate, confident. "It's safe," he said simply. His voice was calm, almost soothing, but the villagers barely heard him over their disbelief. They followed cautiously, unsure how a cabin buried in snow could still be standing. The avalanche had slammed the slope above, and yet he had survived. When they stepped inside the cabin, they understood for the first time. The air was warm. Not hot, not smoky, but perfectly steady, almost gentle. Every wall was dry. The roof, layered with earth, pine needles, and extra beams, held firm. The small fire crackled in its place, controlled and safe. The hidden lower space beneath the floor, which had seemed strange and suspicious, was intact. The heat trapped there had kept him alive while the storm had crushed the world above. The villagers looked around in awe, silent for the first time. "What? How?" a villager whispered. "This shouldn't be possible." Eli smiled faintly. "Everything has a reason," he said. "Every beam, every wall, every layer of roof, it was all for this." He led them through the cabin, showing how the double walls trapped heat, how the narrow doors slowed the loss of warmth, and how the hidden lower space provided calm, still air even when the storm was at its worst. Every detail the villagers had mocked, the strange layers, the odd shapes, the hidden spaces, was a piece of a plan they hadn't understood. The villagers began to realize the truth. While they had trusted tradition and rushed to finish their cabins, Eli had trusted careful observation, planning, and preparation. He had studied the mountain, felt its shifts, listened to its wind, and predicted its storms. The cabin had not just survived, it had thrived. Some villagers, ashamed, lowered their heads. They remembered the laughter, the mocking voices, the disbelief. They had watched him work alone, ridiculed his slow, careful progress, and assumed he was wasting his time. And yet here he stood, alive, calm, and prepared, while their own homes had suffered. Others were curious. They asked him to explain everything. Eli walked them through the strange design choices, the extra roof layers to hold back snow and wind, the double walls to trap heat, the low ceilings to keep warm air near the floor, and the hidden lower space to survive worst-case scenarios. He showed them how the small fire, carefully placed, could heat the entire cabin without wasting fuel. The villagers listened, amazed, understanding at last that every detail had a purpose. For hours, they explored, studied, and learned. The avalanche had destroyed everything else on the slope, yet Eli's cabin had withstood the mountain's fury. It wasn't luck. it wasn't magic. It was planning, intelligence, and patience. It was thinking ahead when everyone else had been rushing. It was seeing the mountain not as an enemy, but as a force to understand and respect. Eli returned to his hidden lower floor. He sat by the small fire, watching the sunlight reflect on the snow outside. The mountain was calm again, almost silent. For the first time, the villagers realized that the mountain never mocked anyone, it only tested them. Those who prepared, those who observed, those who thought ahead, survived. Everyone else struggled. Some villagers approached him with new respect, asking him to help rebuild their cabins, to teach them what he knew. Others simply nodded, silent with shame and admiration. Eli said little. He had no desire for praise. He had built his cabin to survive, not to impress. But he understood that they now saw the value of careful thought, patience, and preparation. The winter was far from over. Storms would come again. Snow would pile high. The mountain would roar. But Eli was ready. The villagers now knew that survival wasn't about strength alone, or tradition, or rushing to finish work. It was about observing, planning, and respecting the power of the world around you. That evening, Eli stepped outside. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the snow. The village below was a patchwork of damaged roofs and broken walls. Fires struggled to burn. People huddled close, trying to keep warm. He looked at them quietly. They had learned a hard lesson, but perhaps it would make them stronger in the long run. He returned to the cabin and lit a small fire inside. The warmth spread steadily, filling the hidden corners and the strange lower space. He sat back and listened to the mountain, feeling its quiet power after the storm. It had tested him, and he had passed. The cabin had survived. He had survived. The villagers looked toward the slope, watching smoke rise from the buried cabin. For the first time, they understood why they had doubted him. They realized why they had laughed at his strange design, his hidden spaces, and his careful, slow progress. Every choice had been deliberate. Every detail had a purpose. The mountain had tested them all, and only Eli had truly been ready. By nightfall, the villagers had returned to their cabins. Many were still damaged, many fires still weak. But they carried a new respect for the boy in the mountains, and for the mountain itself. They whispered about what they had seen, and the story spread quickly. The boy who built a cabin unlike any other, who survived when everything else failed, who had prepared for the worst while everyone else panicked. Eli sat quietly by the fire, the storm behind him, the snow around him, the mountain calm once more. He had survived not because of luck, not because of strength, but because he had observed, thought, and acted carefully. His cabin was more than a home, it was a testament to patience, intelligence, and respect for nature. And as the night deepened and stars glittered above the frozen peaks, Eli knew the mountain was watching. It always watched. It always tested. But he was ready. He had stayed one step ahead. And the village, now wiser, would never forget the lesson. The boy in the cabin cave had one.